Before we get started, a word of warning. This video will spoil various specifics of Transformers issue 18, as well as the 3-page preview of Transformers issue 19. Not only that, but we'll also be touching on some light spoilers from the 2005 IDW continuity, as well as the Marvel UK continuity. Okay, with that out of the way, let's begin. The third arc of Skybound's Transformers series finishes strong with issue 18, which features a mix of some expected elements with some downright shocking ones. Chief among those surprising developments is the first page appearance of Carnivac. This issue opens with Bluestreak, Blur, and Warpath pinned down outside the Hall of Sparks. There's a cadre of lesser-known Decepticons attacking our heroes, with Bitstream and Hotlink from the Welcoming Committee drawing from the plentiful reserves of generic Seekers for obvious cannon fodder. But more surprising is the 1988 Pretender Decepticon among them, Carnivac. This is the first whiff of actual Pretenders-era characters in the book, and it's cool to see Skybound dipping into these less popular late G1 characters. And I look forward to seeing what Carnivac is going to bring to... One second. Sorry, what's that? Oh, he dies. On the second page. Oh, okay. Well... I can't help but wonder if these three Decepticons were selected in the place of more well-known characters in response to some of the reactions to the amount of character death in the series, as I can't imagine too many Transformers fans would be grieving the deaths of Bitstream, Hotlink, and Carnivac. Though, to be fair, Carnivac certainly has his fans, and he got some notable page time in the Marvel UK comic, as well as Sins of the Wreckers and Requiem for the Wreckers from IDW's 2005 continuity. Not to mention, the Wolf Pretender shell part of his G1 toy was just awesome. I mean, how can you not be a fan of this? This is just so cool looking. I loved these Pretender beasts when I was a kid, still love them now. I mean, come on, these are awesome. Nevertheless, I would still argue that Carnivac is firmly a C-lister, and, like all Pretenders, more of a cult favorite. So I doubt the majority of people reading this series will be too broken up over his fate here. I know some will still be disappointed, but hey, look at it this way. He got more lines than Bumblebee in this continuity. What, too soon? The cynical part of me definitely wonders if Carnivac was included because of some sort of tie-in mandate with the new Age of the Primes Carnivac and Iron Fist 2-pack. And you have to admit, the timing is just too perfect. But at least they gave him a unique Cybertronian alt mode, rather than simply reproducing the new toy. In any case, it was cool to see a more obscure character, even if only briefly, and primarily as a means of showing off brand new character Shredhead's ability to literally shred heads. Shredhead also lops off Bitstream's arms. Not sure if he's dead. I'm not counting him for now, but it's highly questionable. But I don't think there's any doubt about Hotlink, as Shredhead slices the Seeker in half vertically. I know that there are going to be some people who think that this is over the top and that Shredhead is just way too powerful, but you got to admit that this is a very sweet looking panel. You've got the lightning arcing off the sword and sort of mingling with the sound effect, as well as Hotlink's wound itself. I love all the details of Hotlink's innards and anatomy that's implied here. Regardless of how you feel about the new Autobot, you got to admit, art-wise, it's good stuff. And this scene shows that Shredhead is not to be trifled with, something that is no doubt music to Alita 1's ears. And can you imagine how upset she'd be if the new Autobot ended up being a pacifist? Look at how happy she is. She's never been this happy, and it's all a result of extreme violence. The next section of the comic cuts to Earth, specifically the San Juan Islands, where we check back in with Ultra Magnus, RC, Beachcomber, Carly, and Spike. This section was my favorite part of the book because we really start to dig into the long-awaited reunion with Ultra Magnus, and the scene resolves in a way that I never would have guessed. Ultra Magnus is in a bad spot right now in this series. Based on his dialogue here, he feels helpless, alone, and unable to trust anything anymore. Despite the attempts by RC to reach Ultra Magnus, it seems that Carly is the one who is able to cut through the city commander's despair and prompt him to begin lowering his defenses. I think this sequence shows some nice growth for Carly as a character. We've watched her go from someone who was consumed by their own pain and hellbent on revenge, to someone who is capable of seeing that she's not as alone as she felt at her lowest points. Here, we see Carly begin to do for Ultra Magnus what RC was eventually able to do for her, which is offering a path home from the darkness. Of course, just as with Carly, it isn't all smooth sailing. Here, the group is interrupted by G.I. Joe, who has arrived with the explicit goal of capturing a Cybertronian. Needless to say, this sets off Magnus, causing him to do the unthinkable, at least by Autobot standards, and attack the human aggressors with this big honkin' gun. Holy cow, this thing looks amazing. It's not G1 accurate, but I actually think that's a good thing. Can we get some more of this, please? I'm all for kitting out classic characters with new weaponry, especially when it looks as good as this does with all the little mechanical flourishes and green highlights. Big guns aside, the conflict escalates when Carly is incapacitated by a tranquilizer dart and helicopters start surrounding the Autobots and their human allies. Magnus completely snaps here, his trauma resurfacing, and the art bringing us closer into his mind's eye as the spotlight from the chopper becomes Shockwave's single optic. And Ultra Magnus reacts by punching the helicopter in an extremely well done, but also somewhat horrifying panel. And this whole sequence is a little horrifying, to be honest, partially because it's Ultra Magnus doing these things that he really shouldn't be doing, and partially because the characters were so close to having a breakthrough with Magnus. Then that all tragically disintegrates when G.I. Joe enters the picture. Between Optimus Prime losing control and attacking humans, and Ultra Magnus becoming the deadly monster that G.I. Joe believes all Transformers to be, it might be a bit challenging to convince the leadership of G.I. Joe that there is a meaningful distinction between good guys and bad guys here. This scene culminates in G.I. Joe capturing Carly and airlifting an unconscious Magnus away from the scene, and I'm not gonna lie, I was floored by this. I did not have this on my Energon Universe bingo card. Totally took me by surprise. We're 3/4 of the way through Daniel Warren Johnson's run on the title, and for something like this to happen now has really got my head spinning, wondering where this is going. Will this carry over into the G.I. Joe ongoing? Will it play out in the background of what is already likely going to be a jam-packed Volume 4 of Transformers? Or is this moving pieces into place for events after Johnson's run on the title? While all those options are possible, I imagine the most likely scenario is that this will play out in Volume 4, given how fast the title moves at times. But I'm fascinated to see exactly how it's all going to go down. And needless to say, G.I. Joe, they abducted the wrong Autobot, as Magnus will likely not react well to being detained. I'm also interested in how this plays out with Carly. There was a point in the series where she seemed like an almost ideal candidate to join G.I. Joe. I don't know, maybe she still is, but regardless, putting her in direct contact with the team, it's going to be interesting to say the least. And this leads me to a broader point, and that is the way Ultra Magnus is being handled in this series reminds me of some very specific points in previous Transformers comics continuities that explored similar trauma. The most obvious point of reference is the Marvel UK series, where Magnus had repeatedly been defeated and put through the ringer at the hands of a time-displaced Galvatron. The first point of comparison is from the Transformers 1987 annual story Vicious Circle, where Magnus begins to feel worn down by constantly losing to Galvatron, and at first refuses to face the Decepticon again, with some of his dialogue to Goldbug even being similar to what Magnus says when he faces Shockwave and retreats in Transformers 11. Of course, he doesn't leave Goldbug hanging. As the storyline progresses, Magnus overcomes his fear and challenges Galvatron again, with the end result being Galvatron and Ultra Magnus encased in hardened magma from a volcano. Later, after he's freed, Magnus has a breakdown at the prospect of having to face Galvatron yet again, leaving the Sparkabots, or Sparklers as they were called in the comic, Fizzle, Sizzle, and Guzzle, to fight the time-displaced Decepticon alone until he can again summon his inner courage to fight back. While it's easy to connect the Skybound version of Ultra Magnus to his Marvel UK counterpart due to them being the same character undergoing similar circumstances, the treatment of the character's trauma actually reminds me the most of Fortress Maximus from the 2005 IDW continuity. Both characters were tortured and mutilated by a sadistic Decepticon. Both struggled with the trauma of enduring such an ordeal, and both suffered a violent episode where the wrong people got hurt because of something that reminded each character of their cruel tormentors. Fortress Maximus is set off by Autobots aboard the Lost Light who share Overlord's color scheme, while the spotlight from the G.I. Joe helicopter reminds Magnus of Shockwave's cyclopean visage. It's interesting to compare and contrast all three of these depictions of trauma and its consequences in the world of Transformers, because even though there are similarities, they're superficial at best, and each continuity approaches it differently, and as a result, they all strike a different chord. I used the word horrifying earlier for this sequence of escalation in Transformers number 18, and I think it's appropriate. While all of these examples are, in my opinion, fairly interesting and effective depictions of characters struggling with trauma and, in a sense, letting down their allies or crossing a line that should not be crossed, there's just something about Autobots attacking and probably killing humans that makes it feel as though a more significant line has been crossed, complicated by the fact that the relationship between the Autobots and G.I. Joe is not great, at least in terms of how G.I. Joe perceives Cybertronians and the Autobots. So there's a note of tragedy to how tensions are escalating between the two. As for fatalities, I'm not sure how many people actually died in this segment, but I would say the number is at least 4 when you look at the panel with Magnus's opening volley. I mean, maybe some of these guys survived, but I don't know, it doesn't look good. Plus, who knows how many in regards to the specific number aboard the helicopter, but I think it's safe to say there was at least 2 for the pilot and the gunner. So we'll add 6 total humans for this segment with the understanding that it is likely more or possibly even less than that. The rest of the comic takes place in Seattle, where the Autobots continue to try and run damage control, saving and protecting as many humans as possible while Devastator and Bruticus continue to spar with each other. While we're here, can we take a moment to admire just how much detail Corona packed into this shot of Devastator? Look, I love the cartoon aesthetic with the smooth surfaces and the bell-bottom boot shapes many of the characters have and so on. But I also like seeing hyper-detailed depictions of Transformers as well, and I feel like with Skybound, we get a good mix. For details, usually it's massive tech like the arc or close-up on weaponry like the shot earlier of Ultra Magnus's gun. So seeing it here creates a sense of scale with Devastator, as well as maybe proximity with the viewer. But beyond contributing to size, all of these little touches are just incredibly fun to look at. Corona could have gotten by with just using much more smooth surfaces for Devastator, and I don't know if anyone would have batted an eye, as it would have fit in with the general aesthetic, but he didn't. He chose instead to give us this feast for the eyes, and I appreciate him going the extra mile in this panel. The Autobots are kind of secondary to this action-heavy sequence, with the main focus on Soundwave and Starscream each making their final bid for leadership. And this leads to an absolutely fantastic little bit where Soundwave ejects Rumble, grabs hold of him mid-transformation from tape mode, and chucks him through the air as a living weapon towards Astrotrain, ripping off one of the Triple Changer's wings. I love everything about this idea, as well as the execution of the idea. It's just such a clever and inventive way for Soundwave to bring Astrotrain down. All the Decepticons, including the 2 Titanic Combiners, converge upon the skyscraper where Astrotrain crashed, which kind of looks like the Columbia Center, but I don't know, it could just be a generic skyscraper. I don't know a ton of Seattle architecture. In any case, we get this great spread where Devastator puts Bruticus in a headlock and dives off the skyscraper in question. I feel like I'd get just a little bit more out of some of this stuff if I was a wrestling fan, but regardless, I think it speaks to how well those little touches are integrated, as I still think this is just cool as hell. And another example of a creative way of achieving a sense of spectacle with these giant robots that we've seen duke it out time and time again for 40 years. On top of the skyscraper, Starscream gets the opportunity to somewhat redeem himself after his cowardly performance battling against Soundwave in issue 7. He lays into Soundwave with much more ferocity in this issue, ripping off his tape deck door and yanking out the deactivated Ravage. Before the grudge match can go any further, the thing that many of us assumed would happen in this issue happens. Megatron returns in this absolutely stunning image of Starscream and Soundwave frozen mid-battle, with Megatron nonchalantly just standing there on the opposite page of this double spread. There's all these plumes of orange-yellow smoke contrasting nicely against the cool blues, purples, and grays of the cityscape and sky. There's even some orange reflecting off of Megatron, giving the impression of burning embers nearby. Line art, coloring, lettering. This is a phenomenal image, worthy of a moment we've all been anticipating since the series started, ever since the days of #Where's Megatron. Remember that? Well, he's here. And just like that, the Decepticon Civil War is over. Meaning now the already outgunned Autobots have to face a united Decepticon front, with the most powerful Decepticon of them all leading the charge. It's hard not to think that Optimus Prime's worst nightmare has been realized, and that sentiment really comes across beautifully as the Autobot commander orders a retreat, Megatron's shadow looming large in this final image of the issue. The reactions from all the characters here emphasize the sheer presence and menace of Megatron, even missing his eyes and fusion cannon arm, even behaving and speaking as calmly as he is. You can just tell by how all the other characters act that he's just this massive threat. Now, of course, there's a bit more to dig into here. While the Decepticon infighting is ostensibly going to be curtailed with Dad coming home to put the house in order, Starscream is still Starscream, and Astrotrain is still harboring a seething hatred of Megatron. We'll have to see which way the Combaticons swing. I'm guessing they're going to fall in line. And there's still Skywarp and Thundercracker out there as well. Suffice to say, it's not all going to be smooth sailing for Megatron. This brief moment with Megatron also confirms what I and others have suspected since the Energon Universe 2024 special, which is Megatron is imbued with special powers in this continuity. Here, we see it put to use as Megatron finally revives Ravage. Starting to think it would never happen. We don't get a good look at whatever it is that's in Megatron's chest cavity that does this, but it emanates a purple light. And looking at the preview for issue 19, which is a Megatron-centered flashback story, there's a similar device, so I think the pieces are starting to fall into place. In the issue 19 preview, we see Megatron captured and brought to heel by a Quintesson sporting a piece of technology on his chest that glows purple. Very similar to what we see happen when Megatron resurrects Ravage. This device, which is much more visible in the preview, bears an undeniable resemblance to the Autobot matrix of leadership. This is no doubt why Megatron has the abnormal powers that we've seen him use throughout this series, like effortlessly reattaching his own arm or exerting control over Starscream. The Quintesson in the preview expressly states that the device is a means of control, so it seems like a safe bet that this is what Megatron was using on Starscream in that flashback. Regardless, I'm well beyond ready to learn more about Megatron's sordid past and mysterious Quintesson upgrades in this continuity. Issue 18 was overall an excellent close to Volume 3. My only complaint, and I'm not even sure that I would call it a complaint per se, is that this issue is heavy on spectacle, but light on deeper character and thematic moments. But again, I don't know if that's actually a criticism or just an observation, because there is plenty here that I really loved. Jorge Corona's art continues to impress, and he lands many of the big moments with much aplomb. His style is distinct, make no mistake about that, but there are moments where it reminds me of previous Transformers artists, like a mix of Floro Dairy G1 cartoon aesthetics, the angular lines of Jeff Sr., and hints of the extreme 90s energy of someone like Derek Yaniger. And this is a good thing as far as I'm concerned. Corona's take on G1 is a fun blend of the new and the familiar, one that makes every issue a visual tour de force that complements and elevates what Johnson is doing with the dialogue and the characters. We're approaching the end point of Johnson's run on the series with just 6 issues and a free comic book day story to go, and this issue has me absolutely hooked to see where all this is going to wind up by issue 24. I would love to hear how this issue landed for you, as well as what you think about this 3rd volume as a whole. So let me know in the comments. And thanks for taking the time to watch this. It's very much appreciated. I hope you're enjoying the series as much as I am, because I think it's getting really good. And until next time, take care, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.